The Secret Garden. When Mary Lennox was sent to live with her uncle at Misselthwaite Manor, everyone said she was the most unpleasant-looking child they had ever seen. She was thin, cross-looking, and never smiled. Mary had been born in India. Her father worked for the English government, and her mother cared only for parties and fine clothes. No one showed Mary much love, so she was left to the servants. They obeyed her sharp little voice but paid her little real attention. She grew up lonely and contrary, always giving orders and stamping her foot when she was ignored. One hot morning, when Mary was about 9 years old, a terrible sickness swept through the town. It was called cholera, and it struck quickly. Within hours, people were falling ill, and by the next day, many were dead. Servants ran in panic, doors banged, and frightened voices filled the air. In all the confusion, no one thought of the little girl hidden away in the nursery. Mary played by herself, cross and puzzled, until at last the house fell silent. Her parents had died, and everyone else had fled. When soldiers finally entered the deserted rooms, they found her sitting quite alone, forgotten among her toys. For a short while, she stayed in India with a clergyman's family, where noisy children teased her. Soon after, she was told she must travel across the sea to England to live with her uncle, Mr. Archibald Craven. His great dark house stood on the wide, lonely Yorkshire moors. And so Mary's journey to Misselthwaite Manor began. In London, she was met by a tall woman in black, with sharp eyes and a firm mouth. This was Mrs. Medlock, the housekeeper of Misselthwaite Manor. She looked Mary up and down, without much warmth, then spoke briskly about the long journey north. They traveled first by train through the countryside, where the air was damp and cold. Mary pressed her face to the window, watching fields, woods, and villages pass by. Everything seemed strange and unfriendly. After the train came a carriage, which took them mile after mile across a wide, empty moor. The land stretched endlessly, wild and brown under a gray sky. Mrs. Medlock explained that Misselthwaite Manor was a huge, ancient house. It had nearly 100 rooms, many of them locked and never used. She also said that Mary's uncle, Mr. Craven, was out of the country. He was a sorrowful man who avoided company and might not wish to see his niece at all. At last, in the fading evening light, the carriage stopped before a great stone building. The ivy clung thick to its high walls, and the heavy door opened with a slow creak. Mary stepped into a vast, dim hall and shivered at the chill. The next morning, a young maid named Martha came to her room. Martha's cheerful Yorkshire voice puzzled Mary, who was not used to kindness. The manor was still dark and mysterious, but Martha's chatter brought a spark of warmth. Mary began to wonder about the secret such a place might hold. The days at Misselthwaite passed slowly. Mary wandered restlessly through the grounds, though the wind on the moor was sharp and strange to her. She longed for something to do. One morning, Martha told her about the many gardens that surrounded the manor. Some were neat and well kept, but one, she whispered, had been locked for 10 years. Its door was hidden by ivy, and no one was allowed inside. "Why?" Mary asked at once. "It was Mrs. Craven's garden," Martha explained softly. "She loved it dearly, but after she died, Mr. Craven locked the door and buried the key. No one has set foot there since." Mary's curiosity burned. Each day she roamed the paths and walls, peering behind branches and stone, searching for a hidden door. One frosty morning, she noticed a small robin hopping among the roses. He was a lively little creature with a red chest and bright eyes. Unlike the other birds, he did not fly away when Mary came near. Instead, he chirped and tilted his head as if inviting her to follow. Mary laughed for the first time in years. She followed as the robin fluttered across the garden and landed by a patch of freshly turned earth. Scraping with her hand, she saw something glinting in the soil. She dug it out and held up an old, rusty key. Her heart thumped. Could this be a key to the locked garden? The robin answered with a cheerful song, his wings quivering with excitement. Mary could not stop thinking about the rusty key in her pocket. She carried it everywhere, hidden safely, and wandered through the gardens looking for the door it might open. The robin often fluttered ahead of her, chirping and darting, playing a game of his own. One morning, the little bird flew to a quiet place along the old garden wall, where the ivy grew thick and heavy. He perched there, bobbing his head and twittering. Mary pushed at the tangled leaves with both hands. To her surprise, she felt something hard and round beneath the curtain of green. She tore the ivy aside and gasped. There, almost buried, was a knob of iron. Her heart beat fast as she drew out the key. With trembling fingers, she fitted it into the lock. There was a stiff groan, a sharp click, and the door swung slowly open. Mary slipped inside and closed it carefully behind her. The air felt warmer, soft, and still. Roses climbed in wild tangles over arches and walls. Grass and weeds had grown tall and turned brown, but she could not tell if they were dead. She hoped, even after all this time, the garden might be just sleeping. Mary stood very still, gazing at the hidden world. For the first time in her life, she felt something stir inside her. She longed to clear the beds and watch the plants grow strong again. The robin sang sweetly from a branch, welcoming her home. Mary often thought of the hidden garden. She wanted to make it come alive again, but she did not know how. Martha often spoke of her younger brother Dickon, who wandered the moor and made friends with creatures wild and tame. "He's 12, 2 years older than you," Martha had said proudly. "Animals trust him, and he can grow anything." One fresh spring morning, Dickon came to the manor carrying a spade and a bag of seeds. Mary watched from a distance as he crossed the grass. A fox cub trotted at his heels, and 2 squirrels clung to his shoulders, twitching their tails. A skylark circled overhead, singing as if to keep him company. Mary had never seen anyone like him. Dickon's face was brown with sun and wind, and his eyes were bright with friendliness. When he noticed Mary, he touched his cap politely. "They're a lonely little lass, aren't tha?" he said in his soft Yorkshire voice. Something about his manner made Mary feel safe. She found herself telling him about the robin, the ivy-covered wall, and at last the rusty key. To her own surprise, she trusted him enough to lead him to the hidden door. As they stepped inside, Dickon's eyes shone with delight. He knelt and touched the earth with gentle hands. "They're waking up," he said, pointing to tiny green shoots. "With a bit of care, they'll grow strong again." Mary's heart lifted. She had found a secret garden and a friend to share it with. Misselthwaite Manor was full of long corridors and closed doors. Sometimes, when Mary wandered through the silence, she thought she heard faint sounds, soft footsteps, or even a muffled sob. Martha said there were no ghosts in the manor, but Mary was not so sure. More than once, as she lay awake, she thought she heard someone crying. One wild night, the wind howled across the moor, and in the quiet that followed, the sound came again, clearer than ever. It was not the wind at all, but a human voice, thin and sorrowful. Mary sat up, her heart beating fast. Curiosity burned in her. Feeling brave, she slipped out of bed, lit a candle, and opened her door. The house seemed endless in the flickering light of her candle. Shadows stretched along the passages as she followed the sound. She turned corners, climbed a staircase, and at last came to a door hidden at the end of a long corridor. Her hand trembled as she turned the handle. Inside, in a great carved bed with heavy curtains, lay a boy about her own age. His face was pale, and his dark eyes widened at the sight of her. "I'm Colin Craven," he said in a weak but commanding voice. "Who are you? How did you get here?" "I'm Mary Lennox," she answered almost boldly. "I heard someone crying." For the first time since coming to Misselthwaite, Mary had discovered a secret greater than any locked garden. Her hidden cousin. Mary and Colin stared at one another in the candlelight. Both had been lonely children, used to being obeyed. Yet neither looked away. Colin spoke first. In his sharp, commanding voice, he demanded to know who she was, why she had come into his room, and why no one had told her of his existence. Mary answered as firmly as she could. She had heard someone crying and had followed the sound. He told her he was often ill and too weak to walk far. He believed he would grow with a crooked back like his father's, and might die while still a boy. Because of this, everyone in the house obeyed his every wish. No one dared to contradict him. Mary listened with a frown. It was almost like he was boasting. "You are not as weak as you think," she said boldly. "You only lie here too much. You should come outside." Colin was startled. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. For a moment, he was cross, but then he began to laugh. "You are strange," he admitted. They talked for a long time. At last, Mary leaned closer and told him about the garden. She whispered of the robin, the ivy-hidden door, and the rusty key. Colin's eyes lit up. "A secret garden," he breathed. "It sounds like magic. But what if I cannot walk there?" Mary shook her head firmly. "You can, and you will." In that moment, their secret friendship began. The day finally came when Mary and Dickon wheeled Colin through the long corridors and out into the spring air. His face was pale, and his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. He had scarcely been outside before, and the wide sky and sharp wind seemed almost too much for him. At last, they reached the corner where ivy grew thick upon the wall. Mary drew out the rusty key, pushed back the leaves, and turned the lock. Slowly, the hidden door creaked open. The chair rolled forward, and Colin entered the secret garden. He sat very still, gazing all around. "It's like a dream," he whispered. "Like another world." Everywhere was the stir of new life. Crocuses lifted their heads, green points pressed through the soil, and climbing roses covered the walls with fresh shoots. The robin darted from branch to branch, chirping a bright welcome. Dickon knelt and showed Colin the tiny seedlings, speaking gently as he touched the earth. Mary worked beside him, pulling away weeds and clearing dead wood. At first, Colin only watched, his thin hands folded in his lap. But soon, he stretched them out and pressed his fingers into the soil. His eyes glowed as he felt its warmth. Day after day they returned. Each visit brought a change. Soon, the hollows under Colin's eyes and in his cheeks had filled out. In the hidden garden, everything was growing stronger, and so was he. Colin's visits to the garden soon became the brightest part of each day. At first, he was carried there in his chair, but before long, he insisted on standing. His thin legs trembled, yet with Dickon's steadying arm and Mary's encouragement, he took a few faltering steps across the grass. Each time, he felt a little steadier on his feet. "It is the magic," Colin declared one morning, lifting his face to the sky. "The magic is in the earth, the sun, and the air. It makes the flowers grow, and it makes me grow too. If we believe in it, it will never fail us." As spring deepened, the children's health blossomed like the garden itself. Colin's cheeks flushed with color, and his eyes grew bright and steady. Mary's face lost its sharp, pinched look, and she carried herself with new energy and pride. Once she'd been sour, cross, and full of complaints. Now she felt alive whenever she worked with the soil or laughed with her friends. She was no longer the girl who gave orders and sulked. She found herself caring for others, especially Colin, whose joy gave her joy in return. Together, they weeded, dug, and planted, while Dickon guided them with his gentle wisdom. The secret place, once silent and neglected, now rang with voices and laughter. And in the midst of this growth, both Mary and Colin felt their hearts change, as if the magic was weaving strength and happiness into their very souls. Far away, in foreign lands, Mr. Craven wandered, heavy with sorrow. Since his wife's death, his life had been darkened by grief. He kept himself apart from everyone, even his own son, as if loneliness were easier than love. Yet one night, as he slept, he seemed to hear her voice. "Go home, go to the garden." The words stayed with him, echoing in his heart until he could not ignore them. At last, he set out for Misselthwaite Manor, weary with grief. The moor was golden with late summer light as he crossed it. He walked slowly through the grounds, noticing little of the flowers or birds around him. Then, turning a corner, he heard laughter. Bright, ringing laughter, like music. It surprised him so deeply that he followed the sound step by step until it led him to a door in the wall, half hidden by ivy. He pushed it open. Inside the secret garden, roses climbed in full bloom, and sunlight poured across flower beds alive with color. And there, at the heart of it, a boy stood tall and straight, his cheeks flushed and his eyes shining. "Father!" cried Colin. Mr. Craven stopped, hardly believing his eyes. His son, whom he had thought so frail, was strong before him. Colin stepped forward proudly, and Mr. Craven opened his arms. They walked slowly through the garden side by side. Above them, the robin sang, blessing the moment with its song.